All right, we got a lot of verses here today, buddy. I'm telling you, it's a good study. Um, and we'll get through it, but we're not going to get through it. We're going to get started in it. John chapter 6 and verse 35. We're going to start there with our text for today. And it says here in John 6:35, it says, "And Jesus said unto them, I am the bread of life. He that cometh to me shall never hunger, and he that believeth on me shall never thirst." All right, so the main focus of this lesson is I am. Okay, before we get to the bread of life, we got to see who the I am is. All right, so the word I am 23 times in the book of John is how many times that was used. And so if we look at this a little bit in detail, I probably will missay this word or mispronounce this word. Ego eimi is what it is in the Greek. Okay, it means I exist. Okay, so this is the name that God gave to Moses back in the Old Testament. I exist. And if you notice that, it is the first person and active. Okay, by that I mean he's continually present, not past tense. He always is and always will be and always is in existence. Okay, now in chapter 4, we're going to do a lot of scriptures today, and we'll go back to chapter 4. We've studied this about the woman in the well, and at verse 26 we can see what he told the woman at the well. It says, Jesus said unto her, I that speaketh unto thee am he. Okay, so we see here he was the one. He was the Christ. He was the I am. Later, John listed seven metaphors with the I am in front of it. And we can see those all through the scriptures. We'll see them later as we get to those. It might be 2030 before we get there, but we'll see them, Lord willing. It says one of them is that we're talking about today is I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the door of the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the true vine. Those are all the I ams that were used in the book of John. Not all of them. That's some of the major ones that were in there. 7 of them, where he declares a metaphor to describe who he is. The bread of life needs to be partaken of and consumed. Okay, you can put the old saying is you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. But that's the thing about the bread of life. He's there for us to consume. We have to consume it. And what happens when we eat bread? Okay, when we actually eat physical bread, it's nourishment to us and it's helpful to us. Okay, so the bread of life is nourishment to our soul and it helps our soul. He is the only one that could claim to be the bread of life. And that's kind of where we're going to go in today's lesson. We're going to look at how he has the right to claim that. He's the only one to claim this. He's the only one that has the right to claim this. So hopefully the Holy Spirit will move our hearts and our minds as we see this. Now, if we look back, we look at some of the prophecies in the Bible. We're going to start off a little bit here with John the Baptist. Okay, let's turn over to Matthew chapter 11, and we're going to see some things in that. Matthew chapter 11, starting at verse 2. Now when John had heard in the prison the works of Christ, he sent 2 disciples. Okay, he sent his disciples to inquire of Jesus' ministry. Okay, John, at this point in his life, was probably second-guessing himself. He was thinking, you sit there in confinement like he was at, your mind is going to really think. And he was probably thinking, well, what's going on out there? What's happening? Why isn't, the Roman Empire overthrown? He proclaimed Jesus as the Messiah. Well, the mindset of all the people was that Messiah was going to come and basically put up an earthly kingdom. He was going to rule and he was going to reign with, judgment, and all this was going to happen, but it didn't happen the way they saw it. And this was some of the biggest problem that the Old Testament prophets had. The New and John the Baptist was the same mindset, that this is not happening the way I thought it was going to happen. They couldn't distinguish the first coming from the second coming of Christ. Now, had he been given some insight to the Messiah, these things couldn't happen. But if we look on down here in chapter 11, we look at verse 5 and verse 6. It says, well, let's go at 4. Let's start at 4. And Jesus answered. This is his answer in response to John the Baptist's inquiry about what's going on. And Jesus answered and said, go and show John again those things which you do hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear. The dead are raised up, and the poor have the gospel preached to them. And then blessed is he whosoever shall not be offended in one or in me. With that in mind, let's go back to Isaiah. Jesus was fulfilling the prophecies in Isaiah. Now, they studied this stuff just like we're studying it, and we're going to go back to Isaiah 35, is where we're going to go from here. And we're going to see Jesus' response in chapter 35 of Isaiah. Chapter 35, verses 4 through 6. Say to them that are of fearful heart, be strong, fear not. Behold, your God will come with a vengeance, even God with a recompense. He will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf shall be unstopped. Then shall the lame man heap as a harp, and the tongue of the dumb will sing. For in the wilderness shall the waters break out, and the streams in the desert. Jesus fulfilled that prophecy. Okay, John was thinking the first part of that prophecy. Look at that verse 4. God will come with vengeance. Okay, that's what they wanted. That's what most of the people were looking for, revenge from the Messiah, to lash out revenge on the oppression that they were under. But if you look at 5 and 6, you see the fulfillment of Jesus, what he did in those verses. Now, the problem was, like I said before, the problem was they could not distinguish the first and the second coming in the prophecy. Now, let's turn over to 1 Peter. 1 Peter. We might have blisters on your fingers today from flipping through so many pages, but it'll be worth it. 1 Peter chapter 1 verse 10 here. Of salvation the prophets have inquired and searched diligently who prophesies of the grace that should come unto you. Okay, so in these messages of the prophets, there was also grace being shown. And we're going to see a little bit more of that as we go along here today too. So they studied and they constantly and diligently searched the scriptures. And now let's go back again to Isaiah. We're going to learn about the God-man. Okay, Isaiah chapter 7. Well, I'll get there eventually. I probably should have held my spot there. Okay. Isaiah chapter 7. All right, and verse 14. Okay, therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. All right, we know that as the birth of Jesus. Okay, now notice in this, the original Greek word is not woman. Okay, the word here is virgin. Okay, now this is an Old Testament prophecy that a virgin will have a child. Okay, now if you was to say, if that word was woman, it would be no big deal. I mean, the woman conceived and had a child. That happens all the time. But for this to happen to a virgin is totally different. All right. So a virgin conceived. Okay. There's something definitely new in this verse here. Let's go over to the New Testament. We're going to go back to Isaiah eventually, so you might as well keep your spot there. Let's go to the New Testament to Luke chapter 1. Okay, Luke chapter 1 and verse 35. And the angel answered unto her, this is talking to Mary, and said unto her, the Holy Ghost shall come upon thee, and the power of the highest shall overshadow thee. Therefore also that holy thing which shall be born of thee shall be called the Son of God. All right, so here we see the God-man, the Son of God. All right, Mary was a virgin. She was going to have a supernatural event happen in her life. Okay, let's go over to John 1 and 14. John 1:14 says, and the Word was made flesh, and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, and the glory of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. All right? So there we can see it happened. God became flesh. He became the God-man. Now, let's go back to Isaiah again. Isaiah 6. Let's look at verse 3. And one cried unto another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. Okay, this is the vision that Isaiah had of Jehovah in heaven. His train filled up the entire area where he was at. His clothing did. And then he seen the seraphims saying, Holy, holy, holy. This holy thing back in Luke is the same that he's seen, the vision he had of Jehovah. Now, let's go back to John again. Hold your place there, because we'll be going back, or close to there. Okay, let's go back to John 12 and look at something here. And then we see here John 12. John 12:39. It says, therefore they could not believe, because Isaiah said again, he hath blinded their eyes and hardened their heart, that they should not see with their eyes, nor understand with their heart, and be converted, and I should heal them. These things said Isaiah when he saw his glory and spake of him. Okay, so now let's go back to that in Isaiah, and let's see what he's seen. We look down in chapter 6 of Isaiah, and we look down in verse 10. Make the heart of this people fat, and make their ears heavy, and shut their eyes, lest they should see with their eyes, hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, and convert and be healed. Amazing that it's going back and forth here, saying the same thing in the Old Testament and New Testament. The thing of it is, in the Old Testament, they didn't have the New Testament yet. And the New Testament ties it all together, and that's why it's important to understand both sides. The Old Testament is always going to be there for us to read. It's God's Word, and we should go back and forth and what we found out in the New Testament to understand the Old Testament. And Jesus himself said the Old Testament was declaring himself. Now, this is where we start to get really deep. How's that for an introduction? Because here we go. All right, let's go to Genesis, and we're going to look at some more things here. Let's go to Genesis 49. Genesis 49. There's some interesting things that we're going to see. And if the Old Testament prophets, they would write these things down, and then later you would see that, well, how is that supposed to be when he said this? So we're going to see some of that today as we go back and forth, back and forth. So chapter 49 of Genesis, and we're going to go down to verse 10. Okay, 49 verse 10. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh come, until shall the gathering of the people be. Okay, Shiloh is the appointed time. Okay, that's what that means. Okay, so the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor lawgiver from his feet until the appointed time come. Okay, that's a better way to understand it. Now, notice the word there, Judah. Okay, so from the tribe of Judah, the kingship belongs to the tribe of Judah. Okay, now that's saying where Jesus was going to come from. He was going to come from the tribe of Judah. Now, let's look over in Matthew 1. Hold your place there in Genesis if you didn't already. We'll be going back and forth here on that too. Okay, so Matthew 1. So we go to Matthew 1 and 3 through 8. Okay, starting at verse 3, it says, and Judas. Okay, that's Judah. That's who he's talking about here in Genesis. Okay, so genealogies. Here's where we get fun with some genealogy, all right? And Judah begat Pharez and Zerah of Thamar. And Pharez begat Ezram, and Ezram begat Abram, and Abram begat Abinadab, and Abinadab begat Naasson, and Naasson begat Solomon, and Solomon begat Boaz of Rachab, and Boaz begat Obed of Ruth, and Obed begat Jesse, and Jesse begat David, and from there on we know where it's going. Okay, so we can see here that Judah in the Old Testament is this Judas here, and this is the bloodline, and it goes all the way up to Joseph. We'll cover more of that in a minute. So we'll stop there on that part of it, and we're going to see some things in the Apostle Paul. He saw some of this prophecy. So if we go over, now keep your place in Genesis right there, because we're going to go back to that. But we're going to go, before we go there, we're going to go to Joel 2, and one of the minor prophets. Okay, Joel chapter 2 and verse 32. Okay, and it shall come to pass that whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be delivered. For Mount Zion and in Jerusalem shall be deliverance, as the Lord hath said, and in the remnant of who the Lord shall call. All right. Hold your place there. Also, and let's go to Romans 10. That verse sounds very familiar, doesn't it? Those of you who read a lot into Romans, you're going to see something here in Romans. Romans chapter 10. Like I said, Paul had an insight on this. And Romans 10:13 says, "For whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved." All right. And then we get into the definition of how they're saved, how God regenerates that person, brings them to life through the Holy Spirit. Okay, it's nothing that they do. But if we go back and look at this, the insight, we can see that Paul had the depth of the scriptures in Joel 2, 32. It says at the end of that, it says, as the Lord hath said, and in the remnant of whom the Lord shall call. It's not our doing, it's what the Lord has done. The Lord has saved us. Paul's seen this, and he went into a little bit more detail on how that happens in chapter 10 of the book of Romans. It's amazing how this all fits together. Perfect. Now, okay, like I said, let's go back to Abraham, and we're going to look here back in Genesis, and Genesis 21 and verse 12. Genesis 21 and verse 12. So many times people say, well, the Bible contradicts itself. No, it contradicts the human mind. God's ways are not our ways, and to get the depth of God's knowledge, sometimes we have to do this to get the full grasp of who He is. So in 21:12, we see, and God said unto Abraham, let it not be grievous in thy sight because of the lad, and because thy bondwoman, and that Sarah hath said unto thee, hearken unto her voice. For in Isaac shall thy seed be called. Okay? So we can see here, the promise was made to Isaac that the generations will occur through, and the bloodline will go through Isaac, not Ishmael. Okay? So you talk to a Muslim, they're going to tell you Ishmael was the chosen one. No, he was not. Right here is very clear. Through Isaac, thy seed shall be called. As God promised in his old age, through Sarah, he would have a child, and he had Isaac. Now, let's go over to, so we can see here, he's the seed of Abraham. And if we look in Daniel 7:13, he's also called the Son of Man. So here we see, let's go over there real quick. Daniel 7:13. There you go. Okay, Daniel 7 and chapter 13, or chapter 7, verse 13. And there was given to him dominion and glory and a kingdom, and all people and nations and languages serve him, and his dominion is everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. Okay. Throughout, let me find this here. Throughout all of this, Daniel, wait a minute. Let me go up here. Daniel declares Jesus as the Son of Man. Through the scriptures, we see Jesus declaring himself as the Son of Man, and I think I had the wrong verse on that one. No, there it is, 13, not 14. I saw in the night visions, behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of the heaven, and came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. Okay, so we can see Jesus in the Old Testament in this verse here, the Son of Man. And if we go over to Psalms 2, turn over to Psalms 2 and verse 7, we're going to see here, it says, I will declare the decree the Lord has said unto me, Thou art my son, this day I have begotten thee. Okay. So I know I'm kind of going fast, but we're going to run out of time if I don't. So, with all this in mind, how can man be God? God be man. He can be the Son of God, be the Son of Man. Be born of a woman, and that woman was a virgin. And be the creator of the woman. All these prophecies, like as Nicodemus said, how can these things be? Okay, it's baffling when you think about it. Now, hold your place there in Psalms. Let's go over to Matthew once again. Matthew 22. 22 and verse 41 through 46. We're going to look at this real quick. 41 through 36. While the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them, saying, What do you think of Christ? Whose son is he? What did they answer there? They said unto him, the son of David. So then he saith unto them, How then doth David in spirit call him Lord, saying, The Lord said unto my Lord, Sit thou on my right hand, till I make thine enemies thy footstool. If David then is called him Lord, how is he his son? Okay, let's look back there real quick. Psalms 110. That ain't right. I got the wrong one. Probably 210 here. All right. Help me out, Chuck, on that one. I wrote down that one for sure wrong. There's your homework assignment. Bring me that verse next week. All right, but he does say it. I have read it. What Jesus quoted there in the Old Testament in Psalm, the Lord said unto my Lord, Sit thou on my right hand, till I make thine enemies thy footstool. So he's declaring who he is to them and saying that he was not born of a man, he was born of a woman, and he was also born of God. He knew David before David knew him. But I love what 46 says there. No man was able to answer him a word. Neither does from that any man from that day forth ask him any more questions, because he baffled them with his knowledge. He was able to overcome their arrogance and their pride with his question to them. He stumped them. Okay, so how can he be the son of David and at the same time being the God of David? The answer to that is found over in John 14. John 14. And verse 9. John 14 and verse 9. Jesus said unto them, I have been so long time with you, and yet thou hast not known me, Philip? Is he that seen me hath seen the Father? And how sayest thou there, show us a sign? Show us the Father. Okay. Jesus had the inside scoop on all of it. His knowledge far passes ours. But back to Genesis 49. He was from the line of Judah. So here's where it kind of gets interesting and really deeper, I should say, than what we've got so far. Genesis 49 and verse 10. 49:10. Okay, so we see here again that the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh come, till his appointed time. And unto him shall the gathering of the people be. All right. Now, the kingship belonged or came from Judah. Back to chapter 38 in Genesis here. So if we go back earlier, so we see that claim at the end of Genesis, but earlier here in Genesis, there was something that happened, an event that happened. And 38, starting at verse 15, when Judah saw her, he thought to her to be a harlot. Okay? This is his daughter-in-law. This is Judah's daughter-in-law that he thought was a harlot. All right? As the story goes on, it says, he turned to her by the way and said, Go, and I pray thee, let me come into thee, and for he knew not that he was his daughter-in-law. She was his daughter-in-law. And she said, What wilt thou give me that thou mayest come unto me? Okay, so she's basically wanting payment for sex, plain and simple. Okay? As it goes on, she got pregnant by Judah. All right? Now, if we go down here, let's see. Okay. So, and it came to pass about 3 months after that it was told Judah, saying, Tamar, thy daughter-in-law, hath played the harlot, and also, behold, she is with child by whoredom. And Judah said, Bring her forth, and let her be burnt. Burnt. You're going to kill her. Have her killed. He didn't even know he was the father. He did not know that. Later on, it's brought out. Okay, and it came to pass, there on verse 27, of her time of travail, that behold, twins were born. She had twins on top of that. Now, one of the twins come out, or half his arm come out, and they tie the scarlet thread around him. He pulls his arm back in, and the other one come out. All right? Now, this is all in this chapter. So read this chapter, and you'll see the whole thing of it here. We definitely don't have time for it today. But we see this. What he did was wrong, wasn't it? It was wrong. Notice that this was written before Genesis 49. The bloodline of the Messiah is coming from Judah. Well, how can that be? He did all this stuff. Pharez was the firstborn, but this was an illegitimate child, cursed by the genealogy line. Look over in Deuteronomy 23. Let's go a little more deeper here. Deuteronomy 23. We're going to see what the law said on this. Deuteronomy 23 and verse 2. The bastard shall not enter to the congregation of the Lord, even to his 10th generation. An illegitimate child shall not, for 10 generations later, not be allowed to be part of the temple. That was the law. So how is the king going to arrive through this curse that was put on Judah? Let's go to the New Testament and look at Matthew 1. We're going to see something beautiful in this. 10 generations had to pass by. Starting at verse 3. Judah is 1. Pharez is 2. That was the twin that was the firstborn. Ezram was 3. Abram was 4. Abindab 5. Nazon 6. Salmon 7. Boaz 8. Obed, 9, Jesse, 10. And then the king, David, stepped up to the throne. Isn't that amazing that God was able to go through the curse and all of this to continue the line to kingship and not go against his own word in Genesis 49, where the scepter shall pass and come through Judah, the line of Judah. Okay? Look at the women here. Now, we talked about grace in the Old Testament. Look at the grace that God gave to the women in the Old Testament. 4 women that are mentioned in this bloodline, because if we keep on going here, we see Bathsheba's in here. We see an idolatress. That was Ruth. She was a Moabite. They worshipped idols. We see an adulteress, Bathsheba, and we see 2 prostitutes, Tamar and Rahab. Those are all in the bloodline of our Lord Jesus Christ. Those are his ancestors through the bloodline. That's amazing. So now, let's go back to Micah chapter 3. Where was the Messiah supposed to come from? We have 3 scriptures on that in the Old Testament. Micah 2:3, we'll get there, talks about the Messiah. 2:3 says, Therefore, thus saith the Lord, Behold, against this family do I devise an evil from which you shall not remove. Wait a minute, I'm in the wrong one here. I'm thinking the other way around. 3. Am I in the right one? 3:2. Wait a minute. There it is. 5:2. Boy. All right. But thou, Bethlehem, Ephrathah, though thou be little among thousands of Judea, yet out of thee shall come forth unto me that which is the ruler in Israel, whose goings forth have been from old and from everlasting. Okay. So that's where Micah seen in his visions that he had of where the Messiah was to come from, in Bethlehem. Let's go over to Hosea. See what Hosea had to say about that. Hosea chapter 11. When Israel was a child, when I loved him and called my son out of Egypt. All right? My son out of Egypt. So Hosea had seen out of Egypt was where the Messiah was to come from. Now, let's turn over to Isaiah 11:1 and see where Isaiah seen the Messiah coming from. Isaiah 11:1. And there shall come forth a rod out of the stem of Jesse, a branch, and shall grow out of his roots. All right? That word branch. Okay, let's look at that a little deeper. The branch in the Hebrew was Nazet, I think is how you pronounce that, which was translated in Greek to Nazareth. With that in mind, let's turn to, let's see, okay, Netzer, that's how you say it in the Greek, which you might say Nazareth. Turn to Matthew 2. Let's look at that. Matthew 2, and we can see it all cleared up. We have 3 different things that are all over the place of where the Messiah is supposed to be. And in verse Okay, Matthew 2:1. Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king. All right? So we've seen he was actually born like Micah's prophecy and fulfilled. But if you go down to 2:14, he arose and he took the young child and his mother by night and departed where? Into Egypt. All right? Well, that fulfilled Hosea's prophecy. Took him to Egypt when he was a young child. Gets even better. Go down to verse 23. And he came and dwelt in a city called Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled, which is spoken by the prophets. He should be called a Nazarene. So we can see in those three prophecies were all fulfilled in chapter 2 of Matthew here. Jesus had the legal right to be on the throne. His stepfather Joseph was the firstborn in the genealogy, as well as all the others in this line. Let's go back over here to Matthew 1. The genealogy in chapter 1 is all firstborn children. Okay? Remember when I told you about the ring, the scarlet thread being tied around the baby's hand? It went back and the other one come out, didn't have a scarlet hand. Then the other one was born. So they knew the firstborn was the one, but he had basically come out first, and the other one had the little thing on his hand. He come out, but not all the way out. So he was not actually the firstborn. He made the first appearance, but not the first birth. Back at Judah's child when they had the twins. All right? But we can see from there, in verse 3, Tamar was the mother, Pharez was, and Zerah was the one that were born, but Pharez was the firstborn. Okay? And it's interesting how they clarified that in the Old Testament to show the bloodline in the New Testament. She made sure which one was the firstborn. And so she basically put that little band on him, and he wasn't the firstborn. He went back in, the other one come out, then he come out. So Pharez, and it falls right in line of the way it was supposed to be. But now let's look in Matthew. These were all the firstborn children in the bloodline. Let's look at Matthew 1:19 real quick. Then Joseph, her husband, being a just man, not willing to make her a public example, was minded to put her away privately. He was a just man. But if we really look at where he's at in the bloodline here, we look up at verse 16. Let's go to 17. And Eldad begat Eleazar, and Eleazar begat Matthan, and Matthan begat Jacob, and Jacob begat Joseph. Notice there something different. The husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus. Joseph did not begat until after Jesus. Okay? So Joseph's firstborn was one of Jesus' brothers. Okay? Joseph didn't begat Jesus. He was also a just man, a righteous man, because he would have, had Israel been carrying on kings before they, and if we look back, you can see in verse 11, it says, Jeconias and his brother, about the time they were carried away to Babylon. That was the last of the earthly ruling kings in the scriptures here. Okay? But they continued to follow the bloodline all the way to Joseph. So Joseph would have been, had Israel continued to rule and had kings, Joseph would have been a king. Therefore, we can see the prestige he actually had in verse 19, being a just man. He was a godly man. Okay. Therefore, the legal right came through Joseph, not Mary. Mary's genealogy, if back in Luke 31, because we've run out of time, and we're going to probably have to stop here. And in Luke 33:31, came through Nathan. Mary's lineage went all the way back through to King David, but it was through Nathan. So she had the actual bloodline. The legal bloodline to be king came through Joseph. Okay? Joseph was born through the bloodline of Solomon. Okay? So we see Jesse begat David, David begat Solomon, and then so on and so on, all the way up to Joseph. And we have more on this and more on Jeconias, and we're going to have to continue that at another time. But Matthew 1:11, and Josiah begat Jeconias and his brethren about the time they were carried into the Babylonian captivity. So where does this sit? Okay, the last actual earthly king that ruled over Israel was Jeconias. But then we have all this bloodline going on, and we're going to have to learn more about that next week. We are all out of time, but we can definitely see who, a little bit more deeper, hopefully, who the I Am is. So, all right. That's all I have. That was enough, wasn't it?